and welcome to In Our Community. I'm your host, Vidya Pradhan. Today we have a very special guest, our very own Marc Potter, executive producer here at KMVT. Marc has been brilliant at producing programs here at KMVT for 16 years, including several of my own. But what many people don't know about him is that he's a student of Zen Buddhism and an avid poet. His poetry has been published in Firelands Review, WPA, a Palo Alto magazine, and a magazine co-published by him called Two Steps In. Marc Potter, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How does it feel to be on the other side of the camera?
It's really scary.
We'll try and make it fun.
Okay.
So why don't you tell us about your poetry? Does it fall within a particular genre?
Two genres or two sets. One is what I call normal poetry, just your average, basic, hopefully good poetry. The other is a hybrid between surrealism and absurdism.
Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's different between what is surrealism and what's absurdism?
In my own definition, surrealism is when you stretch reality a little bit or maybe a little more than a little bit. Absurdism is when you make a clear break with what could be real.
Give me an example of each.
Okay, so surrealism, an example is Salvador Dali has a very famous painting of the Christian cross, only he paints it in 3 dimensions. Mm-hmm. So you're taking something real and you're stretching it in a certain way. Absurdism would be if I said, yesterday I sold life insurance to a salamander. Mm-hmm. Probably not real.
And do you have a preference between these two forms?
Yes, I do. I like absurdism much better.
I think this would be a good time to listen to one of your poems.
Okay.
Can you do that?
You ready?
That would be great.
I have a, yes. Okay. Good. Okay, so where is the one? Is this it? Oh, this is it. Okay. Okay, this is called A Visit to the Movies.
All right.
I am reminded that there is not anything left. I read the word can't, C-A-N-T, not a contraction, but apparently a different word. But I have not looked it up. Would someone please grab me a soft drink out of the refrigerator? There must be an unusual animal or bird that can take my mind off this. I am thankful for my own life. My own chance. So many people now are actually living in tent cities out of sight. Part 2. No one bothers to remember that it was actually Harrison Ford, not President Thomas Jefferson, who made the Louisiana Purchase. At all likely, then possible, then a fait accompli. Even 73-year-old barbers know better as I lean my neck back, hoping he will give me a nice trim and a decent shave. A young man of questionable dancing or prancing ability apparently sees the object of his romantic focus, and this starts him moving in a small arc, albeit a story arc, like a wounded fawn. Like a football player whose best play of the season is ruined by bad officiating. Someone says something to me, something about the manner in which I put out my cigarettes. I then go into a long diatribe, very gently and diplomatically worded, as to how carefully and thoughtfully I put out each cigarette butt, even being careful to literally erase from the sidewalk the markings that putting a cigarette butt out carefully make on a concrete surface. And then, of course, I place the cigarette butt in a special pouch that I carry with me, just the way a person in the city picks up their dog's excrement with a small baggie. The word can't, as it turns out, has so many meanings that I would not even want to begin. Or was it Tom Hanks? Yes, it might have been Tom Hanks over in Paris anyway, to shoot that movie about Christ having like a whole family and his descendants are among us selling Amway? Apparently, Tom attended a party given by Ben Franklin for the success of his play, Ben Franklin in Paris, and the subject of selling that wilderness in the new land came up, Louisiana Purchase. Tom offered to write a check on the spot, but Ben, knowing the propriety of things, whispered to Mr. Hanks that they should make it look as though the colony's government had purchased the acreage. Tom followed through as requested. And that's the story of the Louisiana Purchase, which is why it's titled A Visit to the Movies.
I can see why absurdism appeals to you.
Yes.
So tell me, is this stream of consciousness the way you write it, or James
really
Joyce?
a lot of it is. I think of it as channeling. It probably really is stream of consciousness. I think of it as channeling, and this could go through 5, 11, 25 versions. So once you get something, then the skill of the writer has to kick in and make it surprising or shocking or disconcerting or upsetting or whatever. But you get something initially by a stream of consciousness.
And the objective is to make the reader do what?
Well, become more alive. We have a story in Zen where there was a monastery back in the, 400 AD or 900 AD or something. And all these very hardworking monks had been sitting zazen for 20, 30 years, and they all thought they were sure they were going to be the next leader of the monastery. But the head of the monastery was a very wise abbot. And one day he was walking through the meditation hall when it was empty, except there was a young lady there. Whether she was cleaning or what, we don't know. He asked her a question, and her response was, she dropped the bowl she was holding and broke in a million pieces. The Zen master, in that exact moment, made her the head of the monastery, and he retired.
That's deep.
There's something going on there about reality. We're increasingly more and more, we're just drugged by the movies and the commercials and the pharmaceutical advertising, let alone the pharmaceuticals themselves. We don't see reality anymore. I mean, I come from not even a farm, just a third of an acre that had, 100 chickens, 31 cats, 2 dogs, 6 people. And even in that, I could see grittiness in a way that you don't see in the city,
Yes.
And I think we need some of that. Not 100%, but, 27.683 repeating decimal percent of something.
So the objective is to shake the listener out of their complacency, their lassitude.
Yes, and maybe they'll take some of that and use it to be a better driver, a more attentive driver, or when their daughter is trying to say, "Daddy, I need your help," they notice, right? Because a child doesn't always walk up and go, "Daddy, sit down, I need to talk to you." Sometimes it's hard for them to, you know what I'm saying?
So be more aware, pay more attention,
Yes.
be more aware.
Yep.
So I've got 2 children, and I don't recall them ever encountering poetry in a serious way within the school system. So the question is, where did you encounter poetry?
I'm kind of an addict for books. So I spent especially when I was like in my late 20s, early 30s, I would just go to all the used bookstores. Where's the poetry section? And I would just, every book that speaks to me, I pick it up, open it, read 1 or 2 pages, put it back.
Do you recall the first time you encountered poetry, the first poem you read, or the first kind of poem you read? What made you pick it up? What made you say,
well, no,
oh,
it
this
still happens
speaks to
today.
me?
When I go to the library, if I look at a shelf with 200 books, one of the books goes, "Hey, Mark, it's me. Today it's me." And I pick it up. Weldon Keys, I think maybe it was one of my early loves. His poetry is so beautiful, and you know, you're not allowed to read someone else's poem on the air in complete version without their permission. His stuff is really cool. It's just really, I wish I could quote some of it, but he has a character named Mr. Robinson, and he says something like, you know, the phone never rings when he's not here, or something ridiculous.
Is he an absurdist poet as well?
It's not. It's kind of does a little dance between surrealism and absurdism. The things that he says in the poem could possibly happen, but very unlikely.
It's not absurdism, surrealism. These concepts are not very popular in the U.S. these days. And why do you think that is? Why don't we have room for that space for those?
I don't know. I want to try to be diplomatic and gracious. I think Americans are just working too hard. They're too tied into getting money, which they need, of course, but somehow some other countries, not too many, but some, have managed to have a little time for culture. You know, ballet, sculpture, architecture, poetry. Back in the 1800s in Russia, an evening out would be a family would go to a poetry reading. They would go to a restaurant, have dinner, go to a poetry reading, and listen to poetry being read.
I guess in a very consumerist society, there's no time for that or space for that.
Not really.
So my exposure to poetry has been more the Robert Frost, William Wordsworth, the rhyming meter kind of poetry.
Yes.
And I guess poetry has evolved a lot since then, judging by the kind of poems I'm listening to today. So can you talk a little bit about the evolution of poetry from those days where it was proscribed in a certain format to now, to where it is now?
I don't know exactly when it broke open. Allen Ginsberg's Howl was a big step.
That's right.
Poetry now does not necessarily need to rhyme. It can sometimes have a rhythm or a meter, but it doesn't have to be iambic pentameter, you know, the dit, dit, dit. It can be something else. Within the last 15 years or so, some poetry has been more like prose, and it's still considered poetry. Also, there's something that's becoming a little more popular called found poetry. And this is something that you exactly present what you found. One of the most famous young poets, whose name escapes me right now, put in her recent book of poetry a recipe that she found in a magazine. That was her poem.
What makes it poetry then?
Because that, I can say it this way, this glass of water is Zen, is poetry, is Zen, is poetry, and it's a glass of water. And the more it's a glass of water, the more it's poetry. It does not like poetry's not like putting on your clothes. Poetry is like a car accident.
So it has to shake you up.
It has to shake you up.
And that's how you distinguish between, say, a narrative prose and a narrative poem.
Yes.
That it has to shock you, it has to shake you.
In my opinion, yes. Not everyone would say the same thing, but yes, I want it to be doing that.
So who are the modern poets? Are they the rap artists?
The rap artists are some of the best poets we have. And I don't think they're getting enough attention because poetry, unfortunately, like a lot of systems in our society, most of it is run by people in a certain level of power. Usually these people are in the better known colleges, Ivy League or Stanford, places like that, who have a lot of tenure, who have a lot of power, who run the conferences. They decide who gets published to somewhat of a large degree. There's a pretty good system of little presses, but they still get pushed around a lot by famous people with power. Privilege.
So rap artists are authentic.
They are, they're pretty darn authentic, yes. And they're good. It's good poetry. Go out and see it sometime. It's good stuff.
Oh, yes. By the criteria that we've been defining so far, that it will shock you and shake you and move you,
Yes.
then rap pretty much qualifies for modern poetry.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Marc, would you share another poem with us?
I would love to, my friend.
And what's this one called?
Well, I have to look. This is kind of one of my personal favorites.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. I used to not think it helped, but I think it does. This is called For the Love of My Daughters. It's about a man. He used to be in undercover work, okay. CIA, like that. And he eventually was able to get out of that kind of work, but he paid a very heavy price to get out. So we're going to see more about his life.
Okay.
And it's also an absurdist piece, so there are
look forward to being shaken.
Inexplicable things going on, too.
Shaken and stirred.
Let's see, where we go. Nothing can be said. The gregarious pelicans, possibly from any part of the world, will have no sense of whether or not the thin, veiled curtains go well with the sitting room furniture. Are these Louis XIV chairs? Did Joan of Arc inspire this divan? The maid is doing the dishes, but why? Little Martha is supposed to be home from boarding school on the afternoon train. Betsy is laboring at her ballet practice yet again. I try to reward them without cutting them an undue amount of slack or gratitude for their existence. To say that their darling mother died in a terrible car accident is a bold-faced lie, and one I hope to never reveal otherwise. The bullets, too many bullets. How can you tell a child something like that? And my own mother also died in a hail of gunfire, so you can see why I am haunted by it all. The girls are protected as best I can protect them. An inconspicuously armed gunman acts as our door person, a doorman who, obviously, we do not need to open the heavy door. The pelicans, as I said earlier, I hope I said it, do care, and this worries me greatly. They fly around the acreage looking for animals that really only a hawk would want to eat. Small animals, other birds, even turtles. I will only let the children ride in the Bentley because it is the most bulletproof. Contrary to popular belief, discussed at length at a charity ball to which I no longer give, Christmas at our house is a wonderful affair. It is carried on in the following manner. The house staff all get presents, and Martha and Betsy, did I say her name otherwise? I mean earlier. Did I say that Betsy's name was something else earlier? Anyway, as the house staff is opening their presents, the children sit wonderfully dressed and watch. Later, they and I do go into the panic room, and we have our own darling holiday.
Actually, that was beautiful. But it occurs to me that when you adopt an absurdist sort of covering for the poem, it's hard to tell where your experience and where you are in the poem.
The writer, you mean?
The writer, yes.
Well,
does some of it come from your experiences? Is it influenced, or is it what you are reacting to?
That poem comes from my experience of watching a lot of television. That's where it comes from. A lot of television. This guy, you know, when you're in that kind of work, you know, CIA, paid assassin, it grades on you to the point where sometimes he can't remember his children's names, you know. And yet he cares deeply for them, and he's afraid of losing them because his wife was killed, his mother was killed, because you know what the other side does, they go after your family, so.
But do your poems also capture some of your own experiences, your angst, your neuroses?
Sometimes they do. There's one I read here last month, I think. to my surprise, at the very end of the poem, when it was the end of the show, some of these people might have been here, I couldn't speak. I lost my breath. And then I started to cry, and I think I finished the poem, but I have yet to even watch the video. And it was a poem about a guy, much like myself, older guy, landlord's harassing him, and his friend comes and tries to help him. It's in this bunch somewhere, but I read it last month already.
So does writing the poem help you deal with it better, or does it actually make it a little worse?
I think what it does most of the time is it's like having a pressure cooker and having a little bit of the pressure taken off.
Okay.
And that pressure quickly repressurizes, if I can say it that way. So I write in order to stay alive. Let's put it that way. Because it's just life. I find life to be very, I don't know, tough, difficult.
So I guess the Zen helps, the study of Zen Buddhism? It
does help, except what Zen really does, you can't say, teachers cannot tell you that Zen has benefits. Okay. What they can tell you, and this is in a book by Charlotte Joko Beck, Everyday Zen, page 25, only because I don't know every page of every book. I'm just saying.
I know
this. I don't want people to think, I just happen to write about that stuff. Zen gets in touch with what's happening with you, the student. So if underneath your beautiful exterior you have all this anger, like I do, then anger comes up. If you have all this happiness and joy and love for people, then that comes up. Now, yes, if you're a student for a long time, some of that anger might go away. I've been a student for 25 years, and
I know you mentioned
a lot of anger still.
So it's not supposed to bring it up and dissipate it? No, it's not.
It's supposed to make life real. It makes it more real. I'm about having it be real. If I'm angry underneath, I can live a more real life by having some of that anger come out. Not in inappropriate ways necessarily, but at least experience it. Why live on top of your own reality? Why plaster a happy Disney, I'm going to go buy you all birthday cards kind of person, let's put some frosting on this, for your whole life? Why do that?
So the funny thing is that it sounds like Zen and writing poetry both perform similar functions for you, which is to a certain extent.
Yes, no, yeah. It's all about being willing to have some reality peek its way through.
Right. And so does it influence your poetry?
What?
The practice of Zen?
I'd love to say no, but it does in some way, some inexplicable, ineffable way. It does.
It makes you feel more aware of where you are and what you're feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
So who would you say have been your big influences in poetry? I know that apart from poets, there have been a lot of prose writers and international writers who you've mentioned have been big influences.
Yes, and some of the big influences are writers that I didn't read for very long, but my mind is printing out this list of like 25. There's a Scandinavian writer, I can't remember her name, but I think her last name is Aide, maybe, and she writes short fiction. I read only a few of her pieces, very good. John Hawkes wrote Second Skin decades ago, great book. In the Heart of the Country, Günter Grass. Günter Grass.
Grass, yes.
Great, prose writer. Adrienne Rich writes great poetry. She wrote a great book called Diving into the Wreck. And that title poem is just stunning. Stunning. And I go back, Emily Dickinson, when somebody brings out a new edition of a writer from the 1800s who is now being presented the way they meant to be presented, that makes a difference to me. I noticed that. And there's a relatively new Emily Dickinson where they present it the way she originally wrote it. What's different? Well, this won't seem like a big deal, but it actually is. When she wrote her pieces, she put in a lot of ellipses. But when they published it, they decided, oh, that people won't understand that. We need to take that out. Okay. Another example is when Sylvia Plath's poetry first came out, it was published by her husband, Ted Hughes.
Yes, I'm aware of that story.
Not a fan of Ted Hughes.
Not a
Sorry,
fan
people.
Of Ted Hughes, yes, of course.
Recently, last 10, 20 years, her daughter brought out a different edition. The poems are in a different order. Things that Sylvia Plath meant to be there are now there that Ted Hughes had decided to take out.
Okay.
And the Los Gatos Library has that book. But anyway, yeah.
So for people who are unfamiliar with poetry, and I suspect there are a lot of us because we don't get exposed to it a lot in our educational system.
Right.
Where would you suggest they start with if they want to get a little taste of it and have their
Yep, I say go, you know, take an hour and a half, go to a library, your local library. There still is the existence of the Dewey Decimal System. It's fading, but I think the poems are 813 or 831. I think they're 813. Just go walk in front of these books, and if one of them seems to get your eye, take it off the shelf, open it, and read 1 or 2 pages.
But do you need like a guru to guide you?
You don't. God help you. Please don't get a guru. Please, that will mess it up.
Do you need someone to tell you?
That's like trying to eat a photograph of an ice cream cone.
Well, you people do go for art appreciation, so why not poetry appreciation?
Yeah, don't. Please don't. Yeah.
So, name a couple of poets that you would recommend for people just beginning.
Well, it depends on what they want, but I think Robert Frost is a good place to start, even though he's very traditional and it's been, 50, 60
very
years
formal,
since he was around.
Has rhyme,
Still,
meter.
It's very beautiful stuff. It's very beautiful. I really love Adrienne Rich. It's a little bit more gritty. You have to kind of be prepared for that. Emily Dickinson is wonderful. She's from the 1800s. She's very good. These are some of the ones I would say to start.
Start with. Well, we're just about running out of time. Marc will be here for many other shows talking about his poetry. So do look forward to that and do look them up when they air. And thank you, Marc, for sharing your poetic journey with us today.
Thank you.
This is your host, Vidya Pradhan, saying namaste and goodbye.